The Addams Family animated film has no right to be good. Just say it to yourself. Addams Family animated film. You somehow know that it's going to be a 5, maybe a 6 out of 10. The voices will be hammy and the jokes will be forgettable because we've seen it all before. Wednesday will try to murder Pugsley, Gomez will endlessly fawn over Morticia, Fester will be weird, and Lurch will say, "You rang." They're ooky, they're spooky, so what? Yet, somehow, it's actually quite decent. And somehow it manages this while committing every sin I just listed. It is solidly pleasant, funny, rewatchable, and at times astonishingly visually stunning, all the while fulfilling every forlorn expectation of it. And it does this despite not coming from a well-established studio pedigree like Disney or Pixar or Ghibli. It ought to be trash. It deserves to be trash, and repetitive, and bland, and drudgerous, and everything we hate about C-grade commercial animation. But it isn't. It imparts a pleasure opposite to the disappointment of watching someone you admire give a second-rate performance. I was very pleased indeed to be pleasantly surprised. First and foremost, the team that made this knows how to use the potential of the big. As we have said, we know the classic tricks of the Addams Family. We are ready to be bored. This is because we know that Lurch will at some point say, "You rang." We know that when he says this, it is going to be imitable, particularly after some heavy smoking or gargling with some rocks. It's going to be slow. It's going to be deep. Please, can we just get it over with? Now, a simple director might manage to think one step ahead and give Lurch a high-pitched feminine voice, marvellously subverting our expectations, but not for very long. Or another option would be just to leave it out and try something new with the character. Lurch rides a scooter, perhaps. However, this would of course risk losing us, the audience, and perhaps the Addams Family themselves, as Lurch's "You rang" is his simplest and most essential gesture. With those words said in that way, we instantly get an idea of how this character moves through and affects the world. It is vital that this gesture is performed, and how these directors do it, while keeping it new, is very simple and exceptionally clever. They not only do precisely what we expect, but they do it big. Lurch's voice is not just deep, not just slow, but abyssally deep and tectonically slow. It is Lurch, qua Lurch, platonic Lurch, pimp my Lurch. It is precisely what we expect, while being wonderfully different. This is the potential of the big. This technique is not only used in sound, but just as much in the visual elements. A 6'6" figure easily becomes 5'8" on screen, but animation has the ability to recreate the actual lived sensation of tallness and bigness. A fine example is Kingpin in Into the Spider-Verse, who looks and feels like a small building. In contrast, Michael Clarke Duncan, portraying the same character in Daredevil, simply cannot carry the presence of the truly ridiculously colossal Kingpin, born and raised in a comic book world of 89-inch biceps and chests like a pair of bowling balls. How this team manages to apply this to the Addams Family is to make each character a very different and distinct shape. Morticia is lamp-post tall, thin and cheekbony, while Gomez is short, square and guinea piggish in the face. These designs give every moment of their presence on screen indescribable character, and actually quite faithfully resemble the original Charles Addams 50s cartoon. They rest perfectly in the anti-uncanny valley, as they look real enough to be convincing as humans, but unreal enough to actually feel human. Once again, the Addams Family as we know them, but with a renewed grace and presence. A great moment that sums up this reinvigorating bigness is in Wednesday's high school science lesson, where the dissection of the frog is given a 2-minute extended Frankenstein gag, chock full of explosive Tesla coils, overhead shots of things being raised on rattling chains, and plenty of heavy exclamations of "Live!" It takes its time, and explores every avenue of the gag while staying neatly within the expected limits of it. It's like watching a classical dance competition. We know how the steps go, but it's the movement within the limitation that keeps our attention. Throughout this film, you get this impression of contained creativity. The idea that everyone involved knew what they were aping and they totally love it, respect it, and can't wait to squeeze it for every drop of potential. It is a true sense of fun, grounded in a respect for subject matter. But it's not just the bigness and the bombast and the macro that defines this film, but a fantastic attention to detail and the small. There is a real animator's eye operating in places where many don't bother to look. To give you some idea of the animator's eye, imagine for a moment you are trying to animate someone sneezing. Imagine the full 10 or 15 seconds it takes from preparation to action to recovery. Imagine the many tiny movements and distortions that go into making that sneeze happen, and now imagine having to copy all of that in a series of maybe 150 drawings. Animators get very used to looking very closely at something very normal for a very long period of time. But in doing so, they have a chance to see some of the essential nature of things, and what goes into expressing that nature. For instance, one thing the great animator Richard Williams talks about is the importance of the walk. A walk tells us everything you need to know about mood, character, and intention. A walk concentrates the precise idiosyncratic set of a person's bone and muscles into a parade of curves in the air. Next time you watch an animated film, and I sincerely hope you do that regularly, or indeed a live-action film, take a moment to observe the walks. I find this exercise can quickly tell you much about the quality of what you are watching. True to this principle, each of the Addams family walks differently and characterfully. The best example is Morticia, who takes minute steps which have rapturously unintended consequences when they reach her hips. This subtle but affecting visual quality imparts a deep but contained sensuality to Morticia, which is absolutely essential to the basic relationships of the family. The audience has to believe that Gomez's attraction is both real and exaggerated at once. Otherwise, it's either funny or touching, but not both. Either is passable, both is brilliant. It would be easy to put in some words to try and convey the relationship of these characters, a moment in the script, but it is far more effective, enjoyable, and difficult to put into such a constant visual feature as the walk. This eye for detail does not only feature in the walks of the characters, but in several other places. We see uncannily well-rendered water sloshing in Fester's bath. We see various ghostly reflections of faces in dark windows, and the magical effect of light reflecting off a red balloon onto Wednesday's smooth face. The moment that really captures this attention to detail comes from a simple shot of Wednesday lying on her bed. Around her, the bedclothes bunch just slightly, as if she were laying on cake icing. This image is quietly satisfying, as we see someone fit perfectly into their surroundings. Yet it has a thematic dimension as much as anything else, as the entire propulsion for Wednesday's character in this film is that she fits all too well into her family. It forms a shell around her for her to be, but in a way that is constraining in its perfection. She is trapped as much as she is safe. The little can indeed say a lot when applied with care and tact. Beyond these techniques, the film also imparts a solid and necessary message, as well as plenty of decent laughs. Nick Kroll voicing Fester is a particular highlight. "I think I can see my house from here. Oh no, it's a woman's prison." The message is a classic one of finding harmony in division, which the Addams family has an interesting part to play in given its place in the cultural history of the USA. They are a symbol of Gen X counterculture that we still see now, other classic cornerstones being Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. The goth and emo identities, now perhaps not in the same forms as in the 2000s, owe a lot to these works. In the midst of American suburban culture, these characters are black and spiky and weird in the face of the normality of middle America, which by comparison is held up as even stranger and often far more sinister. These two identities tend not to harmonize, and we are left feeling that the weird Addams are always more truly normal and likable than their straight-laced Stepford foils. In a way, the Addams family resembles a more accessible American beauty, again subtly critiquing the drudgerous normality of little boxes on the hillside. This perhaps emerges from an attempt to appeal to a rebellious teenage audience. But equally, I think it points to a deeper and more general rebellion against the cookie-cutter nature of fully developed American society around the turn of the millennium. This system emerged from the victories of World War II and the Cold War, which supposedly allowed a fulfillment of the American dream, at least for Middle America. You can have a job, a house, a car, appliances, and everything the previous generations have considered luxuries and the emblems of success. But what then? Suddenly, the great social industrial drive is complete, and we are left with an empty materialism that gives us a new car every 10 years, but cannot repeat the initial excitement of what a car represented: freedom. So, perhaps a turn begins. The imagery that formed the bedrock of American national identity, stars and stripes and eagles and bright colour, is left in favour of the dry, the desiccated, the black and the morbid. Instead of egalitarian utopias, we favour the images of crumbling aristocracy. The Addams family. Compare these to the images of bright modernity, or at least the yearning towards it, in Miller and Steinbeck and Hitchcock, and it's a different ballgame. Indeed, we are given a different ideal family, and perhaps a family that is ultimately more like a real family than the American ideal. The Addams family is composed of members which are all completely distinct and autonomous. The one thing they absolutely do not try to do is live up to a greater unrealistic idea of who they should be, unlike the family of American Beauty, whose suffering all emerges from trying to live up to one or another idealized image which can never be achieved, and ultimately has very little connection to lived reality. Yet while the Addams may represent a useful counter-argument to the now inert American dream, in previous cinematic outings they never integrate or affect the greater society which they react to. The solution does not reach the problem. In the Addams Family film, in 1999, interlopers from the capitalist nightmare try and get the better of the Addams, but are then foisted out. The end matches the beginning, Gomez firing golf balls into the windows of his straight-laced neighbours. But these are pot shots, nothing more. In the Addams Family Values a few years later, the Addams are sent out into the greater America and the strongholds of its ideals, LA and the summer camp. The Addams do some damage, start some fires, cause some explosions, turn a few from their sleepwalking, but then again retreat back into their crumbling palace, their worldview found sure, but once again siloed off from the greater problem. They may be right, but ultimately they have no greater power to affect society at large. Much like the teenager, they can shout and sulk about how they hate the house and how they hate their parents and who they've become and the world they will soon have to enter, but all they can do is barricade themselves in their room. They can't actually change the facts of the world. Impressively, though, this film manages to move this debate forward to a point where it actually gives a symbolic resolution to the problem, rather than just a righteous statement of it. At the start, Gomez and Morticia flee a mob that hunts them, leading them to their recognizable home. They then cut themselves off in order to raise their children in safety. Down the line, they are faced with the pastel-shaded, coffee-addicted American suburbanites in their new town, which is built just down the road from the Addams' house. One mob with pitchforks, one with iPhones, and a very clear distinction between us and them throughout. Yet, both Wednesday's and Pugsley's arc allow a change in these frozen divisions. We are shown that the Addams family is not just wonderfully kooky, not only a foil for the bland expanse outside, but can in fact be its own kind of stifling. What if you don't want to wear your hair in hangman's bows, but want unicorn hair clips instead? What if your dad wants you to learn sword fighting, but you like explosions? These are not quite the usual teenage rebellions, but they are nonetheless rebellions against a conforming system. Whether your parents say you have to be weird, or you have to be normal, the fact is you are constrained by what you are supposed to be. This is what this film manages to capture. The idea that it's not liking cars and golf instead of spiders and chaos, but it's having the view that you should like what you are expected to like, and not what you do like. The theory, given primacy over the practical, is the problem. Both sides of the conflict represent this, as the suburbanites are shown to be hiding away all their everyday strangenesses, from talking to the cat to enjoying a refrigerated toilet seat. By the end, as is inevitable, everyone's dirty, or indeed clean, secrets explode out and everyone has to face the parts of themselves which do not fit. Yet, together, the communities triumph. The Addams family's house becomes an acknowledged part of the town, but without them losing their individuality. And similarly, the town is graced with many members of the extended Addams family, and richer for it. Weird and normal coexist and see themselves in each other. Thesis meets antithesis, and hip hip hooray, it's synthesis for tea. Happy families. All around. This film does, I believe, give us a great principle to follow, as well as being very enjoyable in itself. It is better to engage with the reality of lived experience more than the virtual divisions of arbitrary prejudice. And if you are willing to do that, you will probably find a lot of yourself in the person you thought you hated. Naive idealism, perhaps, but naive idealism has its place. And this is a pretty good place to find it.